Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Disgusting Resilient podcast from Assembly to Annihilation. This is the brand new sort of Players to Death Guard starter series that we're doing, and today we're going to be deep diving the combat patrol box that you can buy for the Death Guard. Hopefully this is going to help people understand maybe some of the better options to build when making some more loadouts from this, how to use some of the units in this, and some tips and tricks you might not know about. So yeah, let's jump straight in. So before we get into it, let's have a quick look at some of the rules that the Death Guard have. So these are rules that no matter what models you're going to be taking, these are your army's core rules that you're always going to have access to. So the first one is Contagions of Nurgle. So this is a growing aura that grows every turn, so it's on every single unit in your army. That is Death Guard, so no allies. So turn 1, it's going to be 3 inches on every unit, then 6 and then 9 from turns 1 to 3, and then 3 onwards it stays at 9. So what happens to enemy units that are within range of this aura? Well, firstly, they're always going to get -1 to their toughness characteristic. This is going to be good. It's going to help you lower the toughness, so you're going to wound them easier with some weapons. Can make the difference quite a bit. Can, go from wounded on 4s to 3s, or even 3s to 2s. And also pretty good on the high end as well, bringing 6s to 5s, which is technically double the amount of wounds successfully you're going to get through. So it's really good. On top of this, at the start of the game, after you know who you're playing, you get to choose one of the 3 following. -1 to the save characteristic, which is obviously fantastic. Making the opponent's armor worse is going to make you deal a lot more damage. Means that if it's like a Space Marine is within range, not only is a Space Marine going to go from toughness 4 to toughness 3, he's also going to go from a 3-up armor save to a 4-up armor save baseline, which is going to be massive in terms of trying to get damage out there. The next one is more defensive option, -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill. This is going to reduce the opponent's ability to swing at you and hit effectively, as you're basically going to give them -1 to all their hit rolls. Now, one thing that is important with this is it is not a hit modifier, it is a weapon skill and ballistic skill modifier, which means it can stack with a hit modifier, which can effectively give units -2 to hit, which is, as you can imagine, extremely powerful. The last one's more niche. You're probably not going to take it in many games. I personally don't. -1 objective control and -1 leadership. It's very niche, comes up very, very rarely, but it's good if you're against an army that's like a horde of terrible units that don't need to be made weaker armor-wise, because like Hornblood Gaunts with 6-up saves, and they're not really going to deal that much damage to you, but it's a very niche pick, and you won't tend to go about it too much. The second rule is what we're going to call infected and sticky objectives. It's called Spread the Sickness, but basically, what this means is, if you have a unit on an objective that you control in the command phase, the objective becomes infected. An infected objective will stay under your control even if you leave the objective. Now that is basically sort of the easiest way to put it. There are more intricacies to this rule and more things you can do with it, but the most important thing is it remains under your control if you move away. The opponent has to gain control at the end or start of a turn in order to remove it, and these also key off stratagems that we have access to that give them extra effects and whatnot. These objectives also get our Contagions of Nurgle ability, so that's the first half of this page, which is quite cool. So if someone's near our objectives, and even if we don't have units nearby, they're going to be taking these debuffs, which is really cool. Now, if you want to learn more about these, check out the Faction Fundamentals. We really deep dive these rules and what they actually mean. But for now, this is just a primer so that you can remember these rules going forward, because as we talk about every unit going forward in this combat patrol, these rules are always going to be applied, and we're going to think about how we can use them with our units, okay? So, what's in the combat patrol box? So, we're going to get 2 leaders in here. So we're going to get Typhus, who is a named character. Named characters you cannot duplicate, so it can only have 1 Typhus in the army. And we're also going to get a Biologus Putrifier, who is not a named character, which means this guy can actually be taken in up to 3, in up to trios, which is actually a very, very powerful strategy at the moment for the Death Guard. These are 2 great leaders. I would consider them like S tier units overall. I'm always taking them. Fantastic units. Now the downside to this box is the overwhelming amount of Poxwalkers. Poxwalkers are not bad. They're a pretty good unit. They're pretty solid. 30, however, might be a bit overkill in a box. However, it's not bad to have. 20, I think, is actually quite a recommended amount that you can run really well. It's the extra 10 that kind of don't have a place. But for a start collecting box and sort of an easy way to get into the army, having 30 Poxwalkers in your collections is not a bad thing, because the times when Poxwalkers sort of come in and out of being good, at the moment they're sort of in the middle bit, but in the future that might change, and having access to 30 is also really nice. Plus, a squad of 20 and a squad of 10 means you can have 10 sort of like hold the home objective, play it safe. 20 can go out and actually do something. About a B tier unit, Poxwalkers at the moment. Plague Marines, however, are another S tier unit for us. They are bread and butter. It's the core of the army. You're going to get more than just this one box of Plague Marines, I guarantee it. So the fact that there's 7 in here is fantastic. Overall, I rate this combat patrol decent. A lot of people actually kind of like look down on this combat patrol, and I think that's a bad way to look at it. I still think it's decent. The only change I'd make to it would probably be cut 10 Poxwalkers for like a Mephetic Blight Hauler or something like that, just to give it a little bit of vehicle, a little bit of anti-tank, and not have so many zombies. If you're really into the zombies, however, it's perfect for you, because then, 30 Poxwalkers, 30 Poxwalkers, and if you want to do a zombie horde, 2 boxes of this would get you all the zombies that you can legally field, which is 60 in total at the moment. So that'd be a really good way to get that if you're enjoying it. Otherwise, if you're not super sold on the zombies and you just want some, one purchase of this box is definitely more than enough. So let's have a quick deep dive of the units then. So Typhus. So as we can see the stat lines on there, we're going to quickly go through it. We're going to talk a little bit about the stats, some abilities they have, some keywords and what that means, okay? So first things first, what we're going to point out is, if we look at the weapon profile, it has an ability called Lethal Hits. Now we're going to talk about this first, because Lethal Hits is going to come up everywhere in Death Guard. Now Lethal Hits basically means whenever you roll a dice to do a hit roll with a weapon with this ability, any 6 to hit counts as automatically wounding the target. So you don't need to do a wound roll, it just goes straight to the save roll. Basically, it's the idea that our plague and crusty weapons kind of can damage stuff regardless of toughness. A plague knife hits a vehicle, rusts it away, doesn't really matter how tough that vehicle is. So 6s to hit for our army, get to basically ignore the toughness characteristic of opponents, which is fantastic. So now we know that every time we see lethal hits, remember this ability. So 6s to hit, automatically wound. So Typhus has it on his melee profile, which is very nice. Now Typhus, as you can see, has 2 melee weapons listed here. Now, one thing for new players, that doesn't mean Typhus gets to swing with both of these attacks, okay? Now, when Typhus is selected to fight, he can choose one of these profiles. He can either go with 5 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 9, AP2 and flat 3 damage. We tend to refer to these as slam attacks, big, heavy attacks. And the opposite choice is having double the attacks at 10 attacks, but at less strength, less armor penetration, and only damage 1. We tend to consider these either cleave or sweep attacks. It's usually what they're referred to as. Typhus is not the only unit in the game to have sweeps and slams, but having that option gives him that versatility. If you run into Space Marines, for example, who've got good armor, you're probably going to want to use the slam. Again, multiple wound models use the slam, but if you run into something like 10 Guardsmen, go with the sweep. Okay, Typhus overall has a really nice defensive profile. Toughness 6, 6 wounds, 2 up armor save and a 4 up invulnerable. Makes him quite tough and quite hard to bring down. He's also movement 5, which for a Terminator for us is actually fast. Our Terminators move 4 inches. The fact Typhus moves 5 inches is actually a little bit of an advantage. So another ability that Typhus has is Deep Strike. Now Deep Strike means that Typhus can actually start the game off the board. Now if Typhus is off the board at the end of your movement phase from turn 2 onwards, you can basically teleport anywhere onto the board that is 9 inches away from the enemy. Now, that's a great ability, but when we're playing with Typhus in the combat patrol, we're probably not going to make use to it, because to deep strike a model and a unit, every model in that unit has to have the deep strike ability, and we're going to use Typhus' ability to lead Poxwalkers instead, which do not have deep strike, so we won't be able to use that ability. But in the future, should you buy anything like Death Shroud Terminators, Blight Lord Terminators for him to lead, they will be able to make use of that ability, so it's very good. Now, you can see the faction ability, Nurgle's Gift. That is the ability we talked about just before, about the contagions of Nurgle. So when you see Nurgle's Gift, that is those contagions. So, sorry, I'm just taking my jacket off a second. It's a bit warm in here, you see. So Typhus has 2 actual abilities on top of this. The first one is, while Typhus is leading a unit, each time a melee attack targets his unit, so in close combat when you are attacked, you get to subtract 1 from the hit roll. So it's really nice defensive buff, helps his unit stay alive for a bit longer. The more interesting one, however, is the Eater Plague. So in your shooting phase, you can select one enemy unit with 18 and visible to him, and you roll a dice, and on a 1, unfortunately, Typhus hurts himself. Now, one interesting thing to know is that if Typhus is leading zombies, for example, so 20 Poxwalkers, and he does roll a 1, and he himself suffers D3 mortal wounds, it's not Typhus that will suffer it, it will be the zombies, because it's the unit that suffers it. So they kind of act like meat shields for him. Now on a 2 to 5, you're actually going to do D6 mortal wounds. Mortal wounds being abilities that bypass all armor and invulnerable saves, so your opponent basically just takes D6 damage that he can't do anything about, unless he has very specific rules to say he can. That's really nice, really powerful. And on a 6, they're going to suffer D3 plus 3 mortal wounds, so a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6. So overall, these are really good abilities, and they have a bit more tricks to them than you think at first. So let's look at Typhus tips and tricks. So he can lead Poxwalkers and Terminators, as we said. So Typhus in this box is probably going to roll a big brick of 20 Poxwalkers. They're kind of going to act like meat shields for him. They're not really there to do the damage. They're more as a delivery system for Typhus, which is really nice. It gives him basically 20 extra wounds, which he has to chew through before they can touch Typhus. Now, the -1 to hit rolls in close combat from his ability does stack with the aforementioned, previously mentioned Contagion for -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, which means if you've chosen that Contagion, say you're against a melee army that wants to get in close, anyone that charges Typhus's unit will be -2 to hit in close combat, which absolutely neuters some units and really degrades them down. Again, Death Guard's thematics of making opponents worse, degrading them with disease and debilitation. It's really cool, it's really powerful, and you can really feel the impact when you have like Space Marines hitting on 5s in close combat, or God forbid any army that's weapon skill 4 goes needing 6s to hit them in close combat. It is brutal. Now, another thing is that the Eater Plague, so this is the D6 Mortal Wounds ability, can actually be used after advancing, falling back, or whilst you're in close combat. This is because even though the ability is used in the shooting phase, it's not a shooting attack, so it doesn't have to follow the rules of normal shooting attacks. Because it's not a gun, basically. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to use this ability ever. If you decide to advance for extra movement, you can still use the ability. If you fell back out of a combat you didn't like, you can still use the ability. And if you're in an ongoing melee brawl, you can still use the ability. So always make sure every turn you're trying to deal at least D6 mortal wounds to the opponent. It's really good, it's very powerful, and there's a couple more tricks you can even do with it, as we'll get on to. Now, another interesting thing about this ability is it can target Lone Op. So Lone Op is an ability in the game that is normally on characters that says they can't be shot unless you're within 12 inches of that character. It's very annoying to deal with, and it's very frustrating. Now, Eater Plague has an 18-inch range, but we've got to remember, as we said just then, it's not a shooting attack, which means it can bypass that rule and hit them from 18 inches away. It's a fantastic answer to cheeky lone ops that want to sit in the middle of the board and act like they're invincible. You drop in Typhus, you go D6 mortal wounds, piss off, get out of here. It's great. And another interesting thing is, once again, because it's not a shooting attack, it can't be reacted to. A lot of armies have stratagems and abilities that say when this unit is targeted as a result of an attack, or when this unit is shot at, do something. Usually a defensive ability, -1 to be hit, feel no pain, increase the armor. But because this is not a shooting attack, they can't trigger any of those defenses. So Typhus is great to start off an attack with, because it means you can get D6 mortal wounds in there before any extra defensive layers come out. So always remember that. So there are a couple tricks you can use with Typhus. Up next is Poxwalkers. So Poxwalkers themselves are fairly unassuming. They do have lethal hits, as we can see, with 2 attacks, but they do hit on 5s. But it does mean that half of the hits are going to be lethal hits, which is quite nice. They're quite slow, with only 4-inch movement, but they do have a good toughness of 4, which is equivalent to a normal Space Marine. Now, they have an ability called Feel No Pain. Feel No Pain is basically whenever you take damage on the unit, you roll a dice for every point of damage. And on a 5-up, you can ignore it. Now the way this works is it doesn't mean that the damage spills over models. So if I shoot a Poxwalker and I deal 1 damage to it, I deal 1 wound with 1 damage, you will roll 1 dice. On a 5-up, that 1 damage is discarded. Now, let's say I shot you with a 2 damage weapon. Instead, you will roll 2 dice, and if you fail either one of those 5-ups, that 1 model will die. But it doesn't mean if you fail both 5-ups, 2 models will die. It's just still the 1 model, you just have to take more feel no pains. A great way to do this for 1 wound models is to roll the dice. So if you've got 10 saves, you failed, and you've got to make 10 feel no pains, roll them, and any 5-up you get, you can just re-roll the amount of times equal to the damage, because that way you're basically picking up the successes and go, okay, they need to do another damage roll, and so on and so forth. These guys do contain Nurgle's Gift, so that is the contagion aura that grows. So again, every unit in the army gets it. It's fantastic. And they have another interesting ability, which is each time a model in this unit makes an attack, so a melee attack, for example, that destroys an enemy model that isn't a monster or a vehicle, so infantry, beasts, cavalry, etc., you can actually return 1 destroyed zombie to the unit. So basically, this is the typical zombie trope that if you are killed by a zombie, you rise up as a zombie. So it's very cool, it's very thematic. It means if this unit does get into an enemy unit of like guardsmen, you can chomp them, and if you kill them all, you're going to have 10 more zombies, which is really fun, really thematic, and really cool. There's another caveat on this, which says while Typhus is leading this unit, enemy models destroyed by the result of his Eater Plague, so that's the D6 mortal wound ability, will actually contribute to this ability of regenerating zombies. So if Typhus is in the squad and he shoots his ability and he does 5 mortal wounds and kills 5 guardsmen, you will get 5 zombies from that ability. And the idea being that the magic is literally turn them into a Poxwalker, which is really cool. So that's another bit of cross synergy there between the units. So, what to do with Poxwalkers? Now, there's a mechanic in the game called strategic reserves, which means at the start of the game you can pick up to 5 it's a 25% of your army to go into strategic reserves, which means they can go off the board and they can come on from the side of a board, so that the edges of the battlefield edge, they have to be set within 6 inches of it at the end of any of your movement phases from turn 2 onwards. Now what this means is if you go against an army that's got loads of guns that are going to shred the zombies, sometimes it's better to put them in strategic reserves and bring them on the side closer to an enemy. You can even charge the turn you come in, so you can try and get a 9-inch charge onto an enemy unit. This can really help get you across the board without getting lit up. This means this unit's great at exploiting weakened flanks or areas where lack of anti-horde is present. So if your opponent's got a unit of 5 Infernus Marines with the flamethrowers, you don't want your zombies to go near that because they're going to get roasted. Instead, you can bring them on a different board edge away from that unit where maybe they've got an anti-tank unit. You can shoot anti-tank at zombies all day. I don't care if you've got 4 las cannons, you're going to kill 4 zombies a turn maximum, and then when I make combat with you, I'm going to start eating you and regenerating them. So we want to try and look for those opportunities. Now, an interesting thing is that if a unit has an ability that says models in this unit do X or gain X, if a leader is attached to that unit, they count as models in that unit for all rules and purposes. Which means when the Poxwalker rule says when a model in this unit kills an enemy model with a melee attack, you respawn a zombie, this applies to Typhus's attacks. Which means if Typhus is in this squad and he goes, say, you've been shot on the way in, you've gone down to 9 zombies from 20, you finally make combat with that guardsman squad, Typhus chooses the big sweep attacks, not the slams, there's 10 attacks on the sweep, and he manages to connect with all 10, kill 10 guardsmen, suddenly you're back up to 19 zombies because his attacks will trigger that rule, which is really cool. And means that Typhus can solo, basically, if this unit gets in, the Poxwalker damage is kind of irrelevant as long as Typhus keeps swinging and keeps bringing home bodies. Another good thing Poxwalker's great for is clogging objectives with their sheer size of the unit. 20-man unit plus possibly Typhus is quite a large footprint, especially if you spread them out the maximum they can, 2 inches between each model. And you can actually just physically block off opponents from getting on objectives while the unit is alive. and obviously if your opponent can't physically get an objective, they can't contest that objective. And another fantastic thing about this unit is they seem really weak at the front, which is true. They're only, strength 3, AP 0, 1 damage. But with lethal hits, as we said before, half of their hits are going to be lethal, so they're automatically going to wound. If you can get any form of armor penetration increase on this unit, they actually become kind of scary. And quite funnily, you can get them up to AP2 if you take the -1 save contagion, and then you have a stratagem which gives you +1 to your AP. You now have AP2 Poxwalkers effectively. And even funnier, it has a special caveat. If you're near an infected objective marker and you roll a 6 to wound, it's going to be an additional AP. So you can potentially have AP3 Poxwalkers, which is ridiculous given that most of the best power melee weapons in the game are at AP2 tops. And you've got zombies swinging at AP3. It's ridiculous. But it's fun. It's good fun. So armor penetration increases tends to be more beneficial on units that don't have any armor penetration to begin with, such as Poxwalkers. Okay, so Biologus Putrifier. So this is the second leader we're going to get in this box, and we're going to make sure that he's going to be leading our Plague Marines, because it's the only thing he can lead here in this box. Now, what this guy does is a plethora of abilities, which are really interesting and great. So, first up, all these weapons have lethal hits, par his pistol. However, you can see some other abilities on there. Now, Assault means that if the unit that he's in advances, if the weapon has the assault keyword, which is hyper blight grenades do, he can still fire that weapon even after advancing. So this is quite good, means you can still shoot with him, even if you can't shoot with the squad. But as we'll get into, there's some other things that means you can do. He has a pistol. Pistol means it can be shot even if you are in close combat, so that's really nice to be able to put out the pistol, especially at randomly damage free, it's quite funny. And he has Plague Knives, which again, lethal hits, not bad. Now, he does have Deadly Demise, which means when he dies, you roll a dice, and on a 6, every enemy unit in 6 inches, every unit, yours and theirs, if you roll a 6 within 6 inches, is going to take a mortal wound equal to the number, so in this case, 1. I think it's supposed to symbolise him like dying and the grenades on his back hitting the floor and potentially exploding, which is quite funny. Now, interesting thing about this model is when he's leading a unit, which would be a Plague Marines, he's going to give all the weapons they have the lethal hits ability. So even if the weapons themselves don't have lethal hits, they're going to get them. So while he's leading a unit, his injector pistol, for example, will gain lethal hits. Plasma guns will gain lethal hits, melter gun, etc. In addition, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, a critical hit is scored on a 5 instead of a 6. So a 5 or a 6 will basically trigger any ability now, like lethal hits. So you've gone from just having lethal hits on 6s to now having lethal hits on 5s and 6s. So that really massively increases damage output, because remember, lethal hit is wounding the target regardless of toughness without a wound roll being needed. Very powerful, extremely powerful. And his last ability is once per battle in your shooting phase, you can use the grenade stratagem for free. This is a cool little stratagem. It's basically you pick an enemy unit within 8 inches, you roll 6 dice, and every 4 up you get is 1 mortal wound. As we said before, you have no saves against mortal wounds. So it's just a nice way to get some extra chip damage in. It means with Typhus and the Biologus Putrifier, you can average like 6 mortal wounds on something, which is quite powerful. So, the interesting things about Biologus Putrifier, the grenade stratagem, once again, has the caveat that all that matters is the unit hasn't shot. This means it can be used after advancing and after falling back. So grenade is quite free to use basically whenever you need it. Critical hits on 5 from his ability can also trigger sustained hits. We have a stratagem that gives a unit sustained hits in close combat, and if you have crits on 5s, those sustained hits will also trigger on a 5 or 6. So if you have that ability, on a 5 or a 6, you will score an auto wound and an additional hit. So that really amps the damage through the roof. Now the Biologus' assault weapon, which is the rule that lets him shoot after advancing, allows squads to action. Now when I say action, when you start playing with objectives and missions, certain objective cards will require you to do something like basically pick a unit that is eligible to shoot. it can no longer shoot for the turn because it's deploying some teleport homers, but if you do it, you're going to score 4 victory points. Now, normally if a squad advances, because they don't have assault, it means they're not eligible to shoot, which means they won't be able to do that action, as we'll call it. But the Biologus Putrifier being in the squad can shoot, and if one model can shoot, the entire unit is technically eligible to be targeted to shoot, which means that that unit can do something like deploy teleport homers. So that's really good for mission play. The pistol is the same and the same principle, but it allows them to action while in close combat, because again, the pistol lets him shoot while in close combat, which means he's eligible to shoot, which means he can still do action, which is great. And the last thing to remember is, not only does he grant lethal hits on 5+ and sustained hits on 5+, he also grants lethal hits to every weapon in the squad. So this is going to be your plasma guns, your melter guns, etc. He's a massive damage amp, and he's a core part of our army at the moment that makes us deal so much damage. So Plague Marines. Plague Marines looks very intimidating as a data sheet when you look at it. But don't be intimidated. We're going to go through it. Now, the one thing that Plague Marines have going for them is the amount of special weapons they have. Their rule, Remorseless, is pretty shit. It's niche. Basically, if you're on an objective you control, when you have to take a battle shock test, which is basic morale, if you're under half strength, or maybe an opponent has an ability that makes you do a battle shock test, you get to add 1 to it, which makes your odds of succeeding a little better than average, which is decent. And when it does come into play, it does matter, but it's kind of crap compared to everything else. But the good thing about Plague Marines is all the weapons you can see on the left. And that's why we're going to now have a bit of an analysis on Weapon Deep Dive. So, how to equip Plague Marines. Let's go through it. So, regardless of the size of your squad, every squad of Plague Marines, 5-man, 7-man, 10-man, has one champion in the squad. This champion can replace his bolt gun for either a plasma gun, a plasma pistol, or a plague bolt pistol. Now, you should always be picking either the plasma pistol or the plasma gun, as we'll get into. Bolt weapons are really redundant. I would always recommend the plasma gun here, though. He can also replace his plague knife with a bubotic weapon or a heavy plague weapon. We're going to get into all the weapon stats in a second and whatnot, but for now, you should always be doing these replacements. Plague knife and plague bolt gun is the worst loadout you can take, so I would recommend something like plasma gun and then either bubotic or heavy. Both are good, and we'll get into why in a second, don't worry. Then, for every other model that isn't the sergeant, so if you're in a 5-man, you have 4 models to play with. If you're in a 7-man, you have 6 extra models to play with, and in a 10-man, you have 9 other models to play with. You can follow these rules to replace their bolt guns. So 1 per 5 guys can take a blight launcher, 1 per 5 guys can take a melter, plasma, or a belcher, 1 per 5 can take a plague spewer, 2 per 5 can take a heavy plague weapon, and another 2 per 5 can take a bubotic weapon. Now, obviously, if you took all of these, it'd be too many weapons. So, if you have 4 to play with, you can basically pick 4 of the options on the screen in front of you right now. If you have 9 to play with, you can actually pick 2 of every option, because there'll be a 10-man squad at that point, which means the 1 per 5s become 2 per 10, and the 2 per 5s will become 4 per 10. So you can have, for example, in a 5-man squad, you've got your champion, and then you could take, I'm going to take 1 blight launcher, so that's 1 of my 4 marines. I'm going to take a plasma gun, that's 2 of my 4 marines, and then I'm going to take 2 bubotic weapons, and that'll be the 5-man. So these are the combinations you can do it with. Hopefully, this screen, if you just keep looking at it, you'll be able to figure out what's legal and what's not. Let's look at the guns, because a lot of weapons here, people who are new to the hobby will be like, what the hell do I take? So let's break it down. So these are the pictures of the actual weapons on the sprue and the bits you'll cut out, so you can identify them and know which is which. Hope it's helpful for you. So the plasma gun is a mid-range weapon. So mid-range is 24 inches, close is 12, long is 36. Mid-range 24. It has the ability Rapid Fire 1, which means if you are within half range of this weapon, so 12 and closer, you get to make an additional shot equal to the number. So in this case, you'll go from 1 shot to 2 shots, because you get Rapid Fire 1, so you get the additional 1 shot. This weapon has really high arm penetration. It can go from AP2 to AP3, depending on whether you want to overcharge the weapon. Now, if you overcharge the weapon, it goes from AP2 to AP3, and it goes from damage 1 to damage 2. However, it has a caveat, which is after you have fired the weapon, you roll a single dice, and if you roll a 1, basically the weapon kind of explodes and overheats and kills the guy that was holding it. However, if you roll 2 to 6, you're fine, it cools down, you're okay. This weapon's really good if you go against a lot of Marines, and personally it's my favourite weapon in this squad. It's good against Marines, it's got a good strength at 8, so you can kill light vehicles and put dents into stuff. You've got to remember the caveat that we have the lethal hits, so this thing with the Biologus Putrifier will be scoring automatic wounds on 5s and 6s, so with the 2 shots you've got more chances to roll a 5 or a 6. You can shoot this thing at vehicles, you can shoot this thing at Marines, and if you're against something like Guardsmen, who you don't really need the AP and the damage to, you just don't have to overcharge it and not risk the hazardous and just shoot them with the normal shots. So Plasma Gun, I think, is a fantastic weapon. It's my personal go-to. Then we have a Melter Gun. Melter Gun is a close range weapon with only 12-inch range, so you have to be quite close to use this. It has one shot with a rule called Melter 2. Now what Melter means is if you're within half range, so 6 or closer on this weapon, when you roll your damage, which is D6 on this, you get to add the number to the damage, so it would be D6 plus 2 if you're within 6 inches or closer. Melter Guns have incredibly high armor penetration, AP4, so you're going to go pretty much clean through most things. And they have potential for high damage with the D6 plus 2 potential, or even just D6 can roll a 6, a lot of damage. Now they're considered budget anti-tank because even though it sounds great, their strength's not really high enough. It's only 9, and a lot of tanks can be toughness 10, 11, 12. Now it does help that our contagion, remember if an opponent's close to us, they're going to be -1 toughness, which is going to mean the Melter Gun is going to have a bit of an easier time wounding them. And we also have the Biologus Putrifier with us to mean that any 5s and 6s to hit are going to automatically wound regardless of toughness, which is great. The big problem with Melter Gun is obviously the range and the fact it only has one shot, which means if you roll a 2 to hit or you just fail the wound roll, you've effectively done nothing. And we call it Melter Syndrome because it just seems to always happen. And even if you do get through, the D6 damage can be swingy. You could roll a 6, but you could also just roll a 1. That's why I personally prefer Plasma Guns. Bit more consistent. It's always 2 damage when you want it. It's got 2 shots. It's got longer range. The AP's good. Maybe not as good as Melter, but it's good enough. But if you have a lot of vehicles in your meta, or you just really want to like the idea of potentially blasting someone in the face for 8 damage with a little Plague Marine, Melter Gun's a good choice. Now we have a Plague Belcher. So this is another close range weapon with 12-inch range, and it has the Torrent D6. Torrent basically means you never roll to hit, it automatically hits. So you roll D6 for the number of shots, so if you get a 5, you're going to have 5 shots, but you don't need to roll to hit, they've automatically hit, you go straight to rolling to wound. Now the Plague Belcher has another rule called Anti-Infantry 4+, which means if this weapon is fired at an infantry unit, regardless of their toughness, a roll of a 4 or higher will automatically wound them. Now, if their toughness is lower, you'll still wound them like on 3s and 2s, but you could have this gun shoot at a toughness 15, which doesn't exist, infantry unit, but hypothetically, and on a 4-up, you would still successfully wound them, which is really cool. Weapons that have Torrent, we usually refer to flamethrowers, but ours are like chemical sprayers, which is cool. They're really good for board control because you have abilities like Overwatch, which lets you shoot if the opponent moves, but normally you only hit on 6s, so it's kind of crap. But if you have flamethrowers, which automatically hit, you don't have to worry about that, which means you can control areas of the board really nicely with flamethrowers. So it's a good weapon, but it does struggle against anything with armor saves because it doesn't have any native armor penetration. It can be helped by our abilities and our contagions and our stratagems, but in general, it's kind of outclassed by a weapon you're going to see on the next page. So we have, on this page, we have a Blight Launcher, a Plague Bolter, and a Spewer. So we'll go with the Spewer because it's going to carry on from the Belcher. The Spewer is basically a up-tuned Belcher. It has the same rules, it's close range, 12 inches, automatically hitting D6 shots. But this one has anti-infantry 2+, which means if you shoot infantry, a roll of a 2 or higher is going to automatically wound instead of a 4 or higher. So it's already just better there. Now this one also comes with a native armor penetration 1, and both of these weapons have ignores cover, which I forgot to mention, so your opponent won't be allowed any cover saves. This one is kind of just generally better. It has higher base strength, it's better anti-infantry rule, has an armor penetration, same amount of shots, same range. The only thing this really struggles with is any unit with a 2-up armor save, but part of that, this thing can put out a lot of pain quite easily, and it has the same bonuses of board control, and it's quite funny because you can take both of these in the same squad, so you can have a super flamer squad, which is quite nice, and it means if anyone wants to walk past you, they're going to be at a real big risk of getting flamed for 2d6 shots that automatically hit. But it's a great choice, Plague Spear, fantastic choice. Now the Blight Launcher is kind of like a plasma gun diet. So it has 24-inch range, but it always has 2 shots. So you don't have to be within half range like you do with a plasma gun to get the extra shot. It comes natively with lethal hits, which is quite nice if you don't have the Biologus. Obviously we do, so it's you know, it's not really that big of a deal. But it has a decent strength at 6, and it's 2 damage all the time without having the risk of it exploding, which is quite nice. Generally, it's a bit of an all-rounder weapon. It has a little bit of armor penetration at 1. The 2 damage is really nice without having to risk it exploding. Strength 6 is kind of in the middle. It does mean you can wound Marines on 3s or 2s if they're near you. It also means you can wound vehicles on 5s usually. But again, the lethal hits and the crits of 5+ from the bio just help this. But overall, it's a solid weapon. It's nothing that's going to set the world on fire, but it's a really good weapon to have, and I like it. It's just nice and consistent. 2 shots, bam bam, 2 damage. It'll chip away at stuff, it's great. What's not great is Plague Bolters. So I'm going to say this right now. War gear and weapons used to cost points in older editions. In 10th edition, they don't cost any points. There is never a situation where you should ever be taking bolt guns on Plague Marines. They are terrible. I tried a full squad of 10 bolt guns with all the buffs on them in the world to bring up that damage, and it was crap. They're mid-range, rapid-fire 1, just like the plasma gun, but they do have lethal hits, which is cute, but again, the Biologus Putrifier can give every weapon lethal hits. They have no arm penetration at all, and they're only 1 damage. They're completely outclassed by every other gun on this list. Please take any other gun on this list. Please don't build your Plague Marines with bolters at the moment. It is literally a dead model. I do apologise to say that. Sucks. Now, if you really just like the idea of bolters, obviously, feel free to build it. If it's what you want to do, it's what you want to do. Always remember the rule of cool. But in general, if you have to effects on the tabletop, there is no reason to run a bolt gun. Now into the melee weapons. So we have bubotic weapons, heavy plague weapons, and plague knives. Now we'll go with plague knives because plague knives are default war gear. So every plague marine, regardless of gun and other weapons, is going to have plague knives. These are just 3 attacks that hit on 3s, strength 4, no armor pen, 1 damage. They do have lethal hits, which is quite nice again, so 6s to hit auto wound. But in general, every plague marine has this, so even you guys with the guns are going to have a plague knife to pull out and stab. It's a good little weapon, but if we want to take actual melee weapons, we're going to take one of the above. So bubotic weapons are any model that is modelled dual-wielding melee weapons. So any 2 one-handers, so this could be an axe and a mace, 2 axes, 2 knives even. Don't stress about it too much, but basically the idea is dual-wielding weapons because they get more attacks, they hit easier, but they have lower strength than heavy plague weapons, so only strength 5, and 1 damage instead of 2 damage, which the heavy plague weapons have. But what they do have is they all have lethal hits, and these guys hit on a 3, whereas the heavy weapons on the right hit on a 4 with less attacks but more damage. Now, basically the choice comes down to you as a player. What do you prefer? If you like consistency and not to roll the casino dice as much, then bubotic weapons are probably the safer choice. Hitting on 3s means you're just going to hit more on average. Lethal hits, especially on the 5s and the 6s from the Biologus, means that more attacks is nice and beneficial. The only difference being that you're obviously going to deal less damage with only 1 damage. So these are great if you play with a lot of 1 wound opponents, so orcs, Tau, Eldar, Guard, stuff like that. But if you play against a lot of Marines with like 2 wound models, maybe you want to look at the heavy plague weapons. They do hit worse with less attacks, but every attack that goes through is going to have an easier time wounding, and they're basically going to, with 2 damage, they're going to kill Marines a lot quicker and a lot easier. And the appeal of the heavy plague weapon is their potential to spike, so you get a really good roll, and then suddenly this unit with 3 heavy plague weapons in a 5-man has wiped out like an entire like 7 Marines out of nowhere. So basically the idea comes down to, do you prefer consistent rolls, or do you prefer the potential to do massive amounts of damage? Also consider your local play group. Do you have lots of 1 wound armies like Xenos, or do you have lots of Marines, in which case the 2 damage is going to be much more beneficial. Hopefully this is a quick nice little breakdown. Heavy plague weapons are usually modelled anything that's 2-handed, so giant axe, the flail, and biotic weapons are usually anything that's dual-wielding weapons. Okay? So this is my suggested loadout for your combat patrol box. So a 7-man squad, we have a champion with a heavy plague weapon and a plasma gun or pistol. Do be aware he doesn't come with a plasma gun option in the box. If you want a good alternative, try and buy Chaos Space Marine Havoc plasma guns, because it fits nicely onto his pistol hand. You just don't put the pistol on, you can put a plasma gun on there, fits on dead easy. It's what I've done for mine. But failing that, you can model it with a pistol and just say it's a plasma gun. No one's going to have an issue with it as long as you're clear about it. Don't worry too much. I then like to go with hybrid squad. I like to use Plague Marines to be hybrid, to be shooting, to be melee. Means they're always active, they're always doing something. That's also going to be good for you as a new player to learn all the phases of the game. So I like to go 1 Plague Marine with a plasma gun, 1 with a blight launcher, so we've got nice consistent shooting, so we can potentially have 4 plasma shots at 12 inches or lower, 2 blight launcher shots. We can even chuck a grenade. The Biologus Putrifier can shoot his gun, and then we have a flamethrower in there, so we've got a plague spewer for the anti-infantry 2+. With the torrent, the auto hit, so that's there just in case we run across any horde, so we can help spray D6 like guardsmen, gaunts, something like that to death. Anti-infantry 2+ is also just an extremely powerful rule. And then we're going to finish it off with 3 more Plague Marines that are going to be rocking melee weapons. So in this instance, I've gone for 1 heavy plague weapon and 2 biotic. This is because then you have a nice split of 2 heavy plague weapons, 2 biotic plague weapons. You can play around with it. But again, if you're in a meta that has a lot more 1 wound infantry, maybe go, maybe put a biotic weapon on the champion, so it's 3 biotic, 1 heavy. Or maybe you go the opposite way and go another heavy and a heavy on the champion, so you got 3 heavy weapons in total. Again, just build it to your local meta, but this is a fairly safe loadout to build and one that can definitely expand into a 10-man unit. So some tips and tricks. Again, 0 reason to take bottles. Please don't take bottles if you're interested in doing as best you can on tabletop. They're really not good. They're an extremely versatile multi-phase unit. You want to get the most out of this unit, charging, shooting, doing all sorts of things with them. These are your bread and butter, your highest damage dealing in this combat patrol box. Don't forget grenades. They have the grenade keyword, which means they can use the grenade stratagem, which is a core stratagem available to every army. And it's for free if you've got the Biologus Putrifier. So you can chuck it out, do 3 mortal wounds on average to something. Who knows, maybe you get really lucky and roll all 6. And just dome something out of nowhere. So don't forget that. Always keep 1 model in cover, because cover, if 1 model of yours is hidden, your entire unit is going to get cover even if they're in the open. And this is going to help increase their survivability. Basically reduces incoming AP by 1 at that point, which is really powerful for keeping this unit alive. And do remember, even though Plague Marines in lore are tough, and they are tough in general compared to normal, they're not really meant to be your frontline infantry. You don't want them there soaking up all the bullets. Be a bit more careful, a bit more smart with them. Don't leave them in the open. Let your zombies suffer the brunt of the hits, and then your Plague Marines come in to deal the actual damage once the zombies have sort of got everything tied up and locked down in close combat. So overall, some other combos and tricks you can do. Typhus's mortal wounds can be used for movement gains. So this is quite cheeky, but say Typhus has lost some zombies from his squad, and then you use his ability to deal mortal wounds. If you kill any guys, you get zombies back, but you can choose where to put them, which means if you have, for example, a dude here, and you respawn a zombie, and the enemy are over this way, you can put this zombie 2 inches coherency in front, and then you've basically gained 2 inches plus the width of the base in movement, and this means stuff can go from like 9-inch charges to like 6-inch charges, which are way more reliable. So it's always something you can do. You know, you come in, you can maybe get overwatched or something like that, lose a couple guys. Now you've regenerated them close to the opponent, and you've made an easier charge for yourself. So that's really powerful and a really good little trick you can do. We have a Ferric Blight stratagem, which gives us an extra AP on our attacks. You can combine this with the -1 save contagion to basically increase anything in our unit by AP2. This means we can have AP4 melee, AP6 melter if you're a goddamn madman, AP5 plasma. Our penetration can get ridiculous. Grenade strat for the mortal wounds plus Typhus's mortal wounds averages 6 mortals. Your opponent's brought a Redemptor Dreadnought, really tough to kill normally, a bit of a nightmare for Death Guard. Suddenly you've just took off half its health in average from mortal wounds that he literally had no chance at saving. Before you've shot anything, before you've punched anything, you've halved the health of the damn thing. So really good, always remember to make the most of those mortal wounds. You can use your Poxwalkers to trap units as well. So if you manage to make a big charge, don't just charge to the front of the opponent's unit, try and surround it fully, because what it means is your opponent either has to stay in melee, or if they want to fall back and get away from you, if they can't because you fully circled them, they have to do what's called Desperate Breakout, which means they can move, but then they must roll 1 dice for every model that moved, and in a 1 or a 2, for every 1 or a 2 they roll, a model is slain. Not take a wound, killed. Which means if a tank is fully surrounded and the tank wants to run away, there's a 33% chance that tank just explodes. So remember this. You can also use the squad of 10 Poxwalkers to force bad trades. Something that you'll learn if you go and watch the Faction Fundamentals and we talk about things more. I definitely recommend Faction Fundamentals to learn all the stratagems, all the extra things. It's a much more big deep dive and quite a long video, but it's one of my pride and joys. I'm very proud of that video, and I think it's really useful for players. But you don't want to send out your big tough unit or your Plague Marines first because they're just going to die. You want to send out sometimes your crap unit because then your opponent has to react to it. And the idea of what we call trades is you send out 50 points of Poxwalkers, they respond with a 150 point Marine squad to kill it, but then you respond with Plague Marines to kill that Marine squad, and at that point you've traded 50 points of Poxwalkers for 150 points of Marines, so you're winning at that point. So do remember that. Don't send out your best units first. Use your crappy units sometimes to lure the opponent in and then capitalise. Now, just to finish up, we're going to try not let it go too long. It's gone way longer than thought. Sorry, apologies. I do have a tendency to get into it. But some great additions to this is I would definitely recommend picking these up if you want some more fun, balanced games. Combat patrols are a bit all over the place with points, but the best things you can buy to add to this combat patrol box is definitely going to be a Chaos Rhino. It is a transport that can carry them around. It gives them everything they need. Protection, gives them speed. They can shoot out the top of the Rhino, which is fantastic. It can absorb Overwatch for them. All sorts of things. Just run into things that they don't want shooting your Plague Marines. It's going to keep them safe, and it's going to make sure that they can deliver their lethal payload and that lethal melee where it needs to be. The other one I'm going to suggest is going to be the Fetid Bloat Drone or a Blight Hauler. These are great fast little skirmishing demon engines. The Blight Hauler is super cheap. It's like 15 quid or something. It's dead easy to pick one up. And it's going to give you a bit of anti-tank in that one. Whereas the Bloat Drone is a little faster because of the fly keyword. And it has a plethora of options ranging from more of those amazing flamethrowers, with the anti-infantry 2+, to some nasty melee, and also to a long-range sort of like mid-strength plink shot weapon with the heavy blight launcher, is quite nice. Overall, pick these sort of depending on your local playgroup. If it's lots of infantry, I'd probably recommend the Bloat Drone. If people are really starting to get into vehicles and tanks and dreadnoughts and stuff, I'd go with the Blight Hauler instead. But both of these additions will roughly bring your army to around 600 points, which is kind of where the other combat patrols are. So it's a great 2 additions you can put straight into your combat patrol and get playing with your mates, and hopefully you'll notice the impact these units can make to the army straight away. So for now, that's all we're going to talk about for the combat patrol box. Again, if you want to really deep dive the army rules stuff, check out Faction Fundamentals. We're going to talk about how to expand this into like a 1K list coming up in the next episode on this series. But I hope you found it useful. Hope you find it entertaining, and I hope you might take some things away from it for how to assemble, build, load out your squads, and then some tips and tricks for your first few games with this combat patrol. So for now, thank you to everyone on the screen, YouTube members, Nurgles Magic Discord, Disgusting Resilient Discord, you the viewer, and if you enjoy what you listen to and you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. You do get access to our Discord. We have lots of new players in there who can sort of help and bounce ideas with. I'm in there, always talking, engaging with people, happy to answer questions and whatnot. You get to enter giveaways, etc., and vote on upcoming content. Lots of benefits. But yeah, it'd be great if you fancy that. Feel free. Just another last thing, I do have an affiliate link with Vanguard Tactics. Vanguard Tactics is another great YouTube channel. Check them out. They basically are all about teaching people to play 40k at a competitive level, sportsmanship, etc. Really good stuff on that channel, so do check them out. They also do coaching services and whatnot if you ever get into that far into the hobby and you've got something you're interested in. I do have an affiliate link, it is below. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you all on the next episode. Stay rotten, folks. I'll catch you later.